Hello everybody. I'm talking to you today about personal finance. This is a topic that I'm personally very passionate about. It's basically a set of things that I have learned over time since I took IE 305 and I ended up, oddly enough, then teaching IE 305 for over 10 years here in the last couple of decades. But personal finance tips and tricks that I've been picking up have helped me live a better life, have helped my family live a better life. And if you remember your IE 305 class, there were two really important variables in all these financial problems. One was N, which was time, and the other was I, which is your interest rate. And I realize, depends on who you had as a teacher, they may or may not have emphasized how this is going to help you in your life. But I had a teacher who pretty strongly talked about how finance really differentiates the quality of life that you have, how engineers make a lot of money compared to other professions. And if we spend that money wisely and we invest that money, especially when we're young and have long ends and we get good investments with high I's, that we can have a higher quality of life. Now let's talk about it. Some of you are probably thinking, well, money's not important to me. I hear that a lot. But then they'll say something like, family's important to me. Well, it's a lot easier to spend more time with your family if you have things called financial independence. What that means is that you can work when you want. You can work where you want. It means you get to dictate how you wish to live your life. I have a lot of friends who are working very hard later in their life, in their 50s, in their 60s. Why? Because they didn't put enough emphasis on smart financial decisions when they were young and ended up in a difficult financial position as they got older. But when you're working 60 hours a week, you're not spending time with family. When you're working a job that you hate to go into every single day, you're not having a high quality of life. There are a lot of people today who are doing just that because they need to make a living. You have an opportunity to live your life now at your young age and to plan your life so you can live the life that you want to live. But it is about planning. It's about strategy. It's about taking personal responsibility for your financial decisions. So let's talk about some of the things that you can do to set yourself up for having a good gap between your income and your spending. And let me say that that's really where it starts. People ask me, well, how much money do I need to save up for retirement? It really depends on how much money you need to live on. You need to really think about that. Some of you may be able to live very frugally, which means you don't have a very high bar on what it takes to make you happy, and therefore you wouldn't have to accumulate as much economic wealth to sustain that lifestyle. Others of you may be a different story. But that's where it starts. It starts by living below your means. There's a book out there called The Millionaire Next Door. It's one that I find really interesting. If you're into this, take a look at it. There's another one, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. That's another good book. They really just talk about lifestyles of people who are financially independent. What it means to live below your means and the things that you can do to help you accomplish that. And so I really want to kind of talk about some of those right now. And the easiest way we do that is I'll write down here on this spreadsheet 4 things here, and really in priorities. One of them is taxes. The other one is interest expense. The other one is depreciation. And the last one is insurance. Now, why am I writing these things down? These expenses that you will incur in life, for most of you, will be substantially more than 50% of your income. I want you to think about that. How many of you is excited about working 20 hours every week or 30 hours every week for these four things? Think about it. Nobody wants to pay money on any of these things, I'm assuming. It doesn't make you happy. It isn't something that makes your life more rewarding or fulfilling. So why do it? Now, obviously, some of these things are under your control. Actually, they're all under your control to some extent. Some of these things are under more or less of your control. Let's start with taxes. There's a lot of taxes out there. Federal income tax and state income tax. Iowa has a 10%, 9.5% top state income tax, which means $9 of every $100 of your income, up to that, may only be a 6 or 7, but still quite a bit, is going to go to the state of Iowa. The federal government has for most of you, will be between 25 and 30% of your income will go to pay federal taxes. So basically, I've identified 35 to 40% of your income right now going to the state of Iowa and the federal government. Now, there are states like Florida, Arizona, Alaska that don't have state income tax. So obviously, not living in Iowa saves you a lot of money right there. In fact, if you'll notice, when people retire, where do they go? Part of it has to do with the weather, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's no taxes. It's a lot easier. You get 10% more of your money almost back by not having to pay those taxes. But there's something else. Remember that we can avoid taxes if we can declare business expenses, because remember, business expenses are able to reduce our gross revenue from your 305 class. And depreciation also helps us do that. We'll talk about depreciation in a moment. So how do I reduce taxes? Well, one thing is I can create a side business, which also helps me with depreciation, as we'll see. And then any expenses I have in the side business can be reduced from my income, and therefore it's non-taxable. So if I buy a truck or a lawnmower in my business, then the money that I make, I can subtract the cost of that before I pay taxes. Think about it. If I buy a $10,000 riding lawnmower, and yeah, they cost 10 grand, hard to believe, I have to make $13,000 so that I can pay $14,000 I have to earn, so I can give the government $4,000, so I have $10,000 left over to buy the lawnmower. If it's a business expense, I can take $10,000 of income and buy a $10,000 lawnmower because I'm not going to pay taxes on that expense. The other thing to think about is with depreciation. Businesses can depreciate things. Individuals cannot. So if I buy a building that I use for a business, I buy a car for a business, and I wish to depreciate that, I can write that cost off on my taxes. For example, I own a bunch of rental property here in town. We'll talk about that again in a moment. If you remember from 305, I can't depreciate the land, but I can depreciate the building. Well, I ask you, if I buy a duplex here in Ames, do you think in 10 years from now it's worth more or less than what I paid for it? Obviously, property in Ames appreciates. It always has. Even in the last recession we had for the 2008-2009 mortgages. So, but the government allows me to write the property, the building on the land, which is usually 80-90% of the value, to zero. I write it all off my taxes. So if I buy a duplex for $150,000 and the land's $30,000, I can take that 120 grand and write it off my income. Pay no taxes on that income at all. Plus all the equipment that I buy and materials I use on that property, my pickup truck, my lawnmower, my weed trimmer, my chainsaw, every tool I own, completely tax deductible. That's huge. Yet at the same time, that property is appreciating in value. So while I'm writing it off on one hand, I'm growing my asset base in another. And I'm raising my rents to my tenants, so I'm even bringing in more income, of which most of that income is shielded by all the additional depreciation. Now you can complain about this all you want. You can say, well, that's not fair that I can do that. Sure, go ahead and complain. But the federal government, the people in the position, they're doing the same thing. You can either complain about it, or you can do something about it and join us. You can take your income and you can invest it. You can invest it in everything from rental property to businesses. And we'll talk about stocks and other things. And you can create another business of any other kind that you wish. The whole point is the government is providing an economic incentive for you to create a business, whether that's owning real estate or whether that's, making some product on the side and selling it on eBay and Amazon. It doesn't matter. There is an economic incentive in this country to build businesses, and you should strongly consider doing that. But because if you have those businesses, you get these tax breaks. It can save you a lot of money. So depreciation is one. Like I said, anything that you buy, such as things that have a net value after a few years, such as cars and tools and property, can be depreciated to zero. So strongly consider that. Another thing to think about is interest expense. So interest expense, that's, the interest you pay on your loan. Now, if you think about it, here in America now, if you buy a house, a lot of that is interest, right? If we look at the fact that, let's say you get a loan of, let's say a 4% loan. Now you remember that I can take that loan and divide it by 12, and I find out that my monthly interest rate is 0.033. You say, that's not very big, it doesn't really matter. Well, let's say today most of you will probably buy a house around $275,000. And assuming that most of that is maybe about a $300,000 house, you put $25,000 down, your monthly interest expense is $900. Now, if you're earning 60 grand a year, that's $5,000 a month. I already told you that in the $5,000 a month that you're taking home, that the government is going to take a third of that. Okay, so what does that leave you with? Okay, so that's tax, that's income, that's what you're left with, and then guess what? I just told you I'm going to pull this out too. That's not payment on your house, that's just payment for the interest you owe in that month on the mortgage of your house. Okay? And then let's pull out another, $200 a month for insurance, but you're also going to have a car, right? You're going to have car insurance on that. You're probably going to have some life insurance. So let's just go ahead and say $500. All right? I haven't even talked about utilities or food or clothing or anything else you might want to buy. Oh, good. You now have $24,000 to spend this year. $2,000 a month, right, on things that you might want to do. I've covered out insurance and I've covered that. But let's take it even further. So that's interest expense, and that's just interest on your house. If you get a car loan, you can take that interest off as well. So my point is that how do you avoid this? Well, first of all, one thing to recognize is that there's different kinds of, there's good interest expense and bad interest expense. Bad interest expense is credit card interest. Bad interest expense is interest on your car. Things that aren't earning you money. When you buy a rental property and you get taxes or insurance, you get interest expense on that, remember your tenants are paying your mortgage payment. They're paying for your interest. They're paying for your property taxes, which I haven't even put on here, by the way. You're going to spend another $200 a month, $300 a month to the city and the county for property taxes. And that's going to continue to further erode your income. But of course, as a rental property, your tenants pay that. Just one of the great things about rental property, and we'll revisit that in a moment. So your objective is to buy things that you don't, buy a car that you can afford. If you can't afford the car, then don't buy it. Buy a used car, buy a cheaper car, buy one that may not be perfect for what you want right now, but pay mostly cash for it. Pay it off very quickly. Don't pay a lot of interest expense. Don't pay a lot of insurance. And then when you save up some money, you can buy a nicer car and a nicer car. Add up that insurance. I had a friend of mine, let me cover depreciation. So depreciation is the other one. Depreciation is that hidden expense, but it's huge. Most of the time depreciation is with cars, but it could be any item. When you buy something new and its value depletes quickly, but new cars are a great example. You take a car, you paid $30,000 for it, a brand new car, What's it worth in 5 years? About under half, probably closer to 12 grand. Well, where'd that $13,000 go, or $18,000? Well, that $18,000, poof, it's depreciation, reduced value. If you buy a 5-year-old car, then it may only depreciate $3,000 or $4,000. It becomes an issue of cost of ownership. So if you take depreciation and interest expense on a new car and the insurance that a new car comes with it, because newer cars are much more expensive to insure than older used cars. In fact, on a really older car, you may not even put full coverage on it. You can see where I'm getting at. You may be spending $600 a month on a car, and to you, it's not all that important. Think about that car. When you buy a brand new car, think about and go look at a car that's 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old. I want you to ask yourself a question. How much difference is the price of these two? How many hours do I have to work to pay for that difference? Not just in the price of the car, but in the extra insurance and the extra interest expense you'd incur. And then come back and ask yourself, am I comfortable working that many extra hours a week to pay for the difference in a brand new car and a 4-year-old car or a 5-year-old car? If you justify it, great. But if you can't, don't do it. I have a friend that bought a brand new Lexus. This gal, very difficult. Her personal financial situation is very poor right now. Very poor. I mean, she's clipping coupons, spending hours on the weekend trying to find deals at the grocery store. To save what? $50 a month on groceries? When she's spending $500 a month in depreciation and interest expense on her car that's not really needed because she could have easily found a much cheaper car with much lower costs. But she doesn't think of it that way. This is the point. You need to get your head in the game and think about how these costs really play and what's really important to you. The other thing to think about, as I was mentioning, is insurance. One of the big things on insurance you need to know is a key word called deductible. The deductible is the amount that you pay before they start paying. So if you have a claim that's $1,000 of damage, and you have a $500 deductible, they'll pay the second $500, but you're paying the first $500. Higher deductibles being much lower interest rates or insurance rates, much lower insurance rates. I have 13 cars, classic cars, that are fully covered on insurance, car insurance. My entire annual insurance bill for all 13 cars combined is under $500. Why? Very high deductible. I'm willing to self-insure up to a certain point. Now the nice thing is if beyond that point, if there's a mass catastrophe, they cover the rest. So think of insurance as more of a catastrophe. Remember that insurance companies, if you make claims, have the right to increase your insurance rate, and that's what they'll do. So in other words, what people do sometimes, they say, well, I've got insurance, I'll just pay for it, I'll have them pay for it. Great, they pay that $250 for your broken window, and then they raise your rates $300 a year. That doesn't make sense, does it? What if I told you that you could save $1,000 a year on insurance if you had a $2,500 deductible? In 3 years, you've paid it back, right? I mean, you're not going to make a claim probably unless it's a really big deal. So get the highest deductibles that you feel you can afford. Use insurance as catastrophic coverage, and then it will be reasonable to pay for. Don't use insurance as this piggy bank that you're going to call on because they're going to charge you for it, and they're going to make a lot of money in the interim charging you for it. So taxes, interest, depreciation, and insurance. These are 4 things that have to be heavy in your mind. I had a mentor once tell me that you should work for yourself 10% of the time that you work for other people. Which means if you put 40 hours a week working for someone else, you should sit down for 4 hours a week and work for yourself financially. Evaluate different insurance policies. Evaluate ways to buy things more cost effectively. Evaluate how you can improve your investment portfolio. Evaluate ways to reduce your taxable liability. Find ways to create a side business that's profitable and provides a great shelter against taxes and interest and depreciation. If you do that, you could be self-sufficient, financially independent 10, 15 years, easy. And I'll show you an example of how you can do that. Let's take a look at a housing example, an actual case of mine. I'm going to share with you 2 cases. One is a rental property situation. So with with the rental property situation I want to share with you, I bought a home in Okoboji. I sold my computer software company in 1997 that I started as a grad student here at Iowa State, as I told you all, in 1987. So I ran the company for 10 years and grew it and grew it and grew it. And I sold it and I made several $1,000,000 when I sold that company in 1997. A friend of mine once said that in finance you can have your cake and eat it too. And what she meant by that was that if instead of spending the millions of dollars that I made, I invested it, and then I spent the returns off the investment, that I could always still have my millions of dollars and I could still enjoy the value that $1,000,000 provides. Think about it. It was very smart, and that's what I did. I sold the company, and I still lived in the same house I bought when I was a college student. We lived there for over 10 years beyond that point, right? I took that money and I invested it. And one of the things I bought was this property at Okoboji. And I didn't really buy it as an investment. I bought it as a place for my family to grow and us to have a higher quality of life. So I did make kind of a splurge there, but I knew that the property I was buying wasn't one that was going to depreciate. It just may not appreciate greatly, but whatever. Well, it ended up appreciating greatly. Within 5 years, that property went from $150,000 to $300,000 in value. Now, you may remember from your class, you can, 305, that you can, that's equity, right? That's net worth that you have. I now have a $300,000 condo that by that time I had paid off probably $50,000 of it. I only owed $100,000 on it. But I ended up, I could have just said, that's great. In fact, my neighbor did. My neighbor and I were sitting down and saying, look, we just made $150,000 just by owning this condo and having fun at Okoboji. But what we basically decided to do was, I decided to do is say, I can't have this money sit here, right? Because that's equity. That's an asset that's not working. And one of the big things you learn about money is that you want money to work for you. You don't want to work for the money. But how does that work? Well, I went out to the bank, and banks lend people money who have money. They may not have it in cash, but they have the asset somewhere. So I went to the bank and I got a loan against my condo for $150,000. Now I still owed $100 on it, but it's worth $300. I got it reappraised. The appraisal said, yeah, it's worth $300,000. So the bank gave me a check for $150,000 and a loan. Obviously, it's a loan I have to pay back. So I took that $150,000 and I bought 5 duplexes. Okay? I put $30,000 down on each duplex, and those 5 duplexes were each worth $150,000. So now I have 5 duplexes, right, with $150,000. So I have $750,000 in duplexes, and I bought them for $150,000. Now, immediately I rented those duplexes out. Most of them were already rented, and I just got better tenants and stuff. And I was able to cash flow the duplexes. In other words, I was able to pay for the loan on the 5 duplexes, the $750,000 loan, and which is actually less than that because of the 150, I actually put down 30, so I only really owed, right, 5 times 120. Okay, $600,000. So I was able to pay off my $600,000 loan plus my $150,000 loan that I owed the bank for my condo, and a cash flow. And we continue to do that. We raised rents over time, and with the additional money that came from the rents, we improved the property. But basically, outside of some sweat equity, I did nothing for 15 years. I got 15-year loans. Well, what happens at the end of 15 years? Well, my loans are paid off. So now, what do I have? Well, in 15 years, those $150,000 properties actually appreciated to $220,000 properties. Okay? So what does that mean? Well, that means that I now have an increased $1.1 million of value, of asset, of net worth. I could go out and sell tomorrow for $1.1 million. Where did that $1.1 million come from? Well, it came from the increased equity on my condo. So did I really put any of my own cash into any of this? No. I just took the growth in value of my condo, cashed it at the bank, bought the duplexes, rented them out, and had the tenants pay for it. And oh, by the way, not only do I have an extra $1.1 million, but These duplexes generate $1,500 a unit, $750 a side per month. Yeah, I know, it's a pretty good deal. 3-bedroom units with a garage, by the way. If you're looking for a place to live this summer, give me a call. So, $1,500 times 5 units, $7,500 a month free cash flow, of which I got to pay property taxes, I have to pay insurance, I have to pay some expenses. So basically, of the $7,500, you can pretty much take $2,000 off. I'm clearing about $5,500 a month off those duplexes, which I own free and clear, with a net asset value of $1.1 million. Both of which I didn't put a single dollar in. I just took equity out of a condo that increased in value over time. Do you see how that works? That's how people become wealthy. You've heard the names Hunziker and Furman, Friedrich Realty here in town. Those were all families that in the 50s decided to invest in real estate in Ames, a college town, with 1 property, and then 2, and then 3. Hunziker family alone owns over 3,500 properties here in town. Think about that. And it started with 1 rental unit. How does this work? Well, guess what I now can do with the $1.1 million? How many duplexes can I buy, right? Do the math. 20% down. I buy those duplexes. I rent those out. Guess what happens 15 years later? Bang. Now I'm buying even more. This is how you amass wealth. I didn't work for any of this. I'm not saying it's renting property is nothing. But literally I spend maybe 4 hours a week managing our rental properties. Today we have over 20 residential units that we manage, and I have about over 20 commercial building property units that we manage. In addition, we manage an active stock portfolio. We'll talk about that in a moment. And of course, I work at Iowa State. I run a software company. My wife works somewhere else. So we have income diversification. That's the other thing I want to talk to you about. It's a little bit on entrepreneurship. I mean, this clearly is an entrepreneurial endeavor, but diversification lets you sleep at night. There was once a story I heard, a conference of entrepreneurs had an accountant show up to give a speech. This accountant was from one of the big accounting firms, like Ernst & Young. So he was up there talking to his entrepreneur and said, you know, first of all, I want to really say how much I appreciate what you guys and gals must go through in your businesses and how risky that is. I could never take on that kind of risk. One of the entrepreneurs got up and said, you know, we were thinking the same thing about you. How can you handle the risk? Of course, this guy's going, what? You know, I work at Ernst & Young. I get a paycheck at the end of every month, you know. And the entrepreneur says, yeah, well, you know, I have 200 customers. I get 200 checks every month. If 10% of my customers tomorrow decide to go out of business or not do anything with me, or the economy gets tough for them, I still have all the other checks, right? I have complete visibility and control of my income stream, and it's very well diversified. You have one employer. You could be fired right now. You could be unemployed right now, have 0 income and not even know it. You go home tonight and you get a furlough or a layoff notice, you go from your income to 0 income. You have one source of income. That's what we call risky. Now, I don't want to overly scare you and make you feel that, oh no, you know, you have to go out tomorrow and buy 20 duplexes. But what I am saying is you need, as you mature, you need to find alternate sources of income. You need to find ways to diversify your revenue streams, because that provides you financial security and financial independence. But doing things like this, planting these seeds when you're young, because it takes a while for the property to pay for itself, right? You've got to do these things when you're young and build these portfolios up and think about it. And this is certainly one way to do it. Rental property is in college towns. It's all about location, location, and location. You may have heard that. But rental property is a great investment alternative. Let me give you some others. The stock market. So we talked a little bit about stocks in 305. Depending upon which instructor you had, you may have talked a little bit more or a little bit less. But the stock market is, one nice thing about the stock market is you don't have to physically do the work. It's all about research, and you can do it anywhere. With rental property, you have to live where the property is, and you have to live there for long periods of time. And for many of you, you're going to be put in a community and you may not know if you're going to get relocated. And so for you, rental property may not be the best choice. Personal entrepreneurship or possibly the stock market is really the best bet. Remember from 305, their biggest goal in investment is to buy stocks that return a dividend payment, right? and which increase value over time. It's like the property increases over time. You're buying your stock as a tool to generate future revenue. This isn't a game, this isn't a Ponzi scheme, and that's how a lot of people look at stocks. It's very simple. Here's a company, this is its stability, you want to buy into nice stable companies, this is how much money it earns every year, this is how much money it pays out to you in dividends, and this is the growth rate of that industry. You always pick the industry first. What is the best industry to be in? And where's it going to go? So for example, right now we're at some very interesting times, as you might know, with the stock market. Buy low, sell high, you've heard that. You want to look at temporarily depressed industries. Think about yourself. What industries today are temporarily depressed but will come back? Well, how about airlines? Airlines are a disaster now. 98% of the traffic in airlines, the people flying, are gone. Only 2% of the routes are flying. Airline stocks are hammered. Airline revenues are in the toilet. How about hotels? How about restaurants? How about cruise ships? They're all hammered. But here's the point. 2 years from now, what do you think we're going to be looking at? Airlines will be back. Hotels will be back. People will be going out eating at restaurants again, right? Buy those stocks now. You're going to get 100%, 200%, 300% return. What you don't want to do is buy a stock at its peak. You want to buy when it's depressed. I had a great story of this. This was right before 9/11. I was watching Warren Buffett. He's an amazing investor. And he was buying a company called U.S. Gypsum. They make the drywall, the plaster wall behind me. Nice boring business, but they were the most cost-effective producer. They had the highest gross margin. Remember what that means? Gross margin means after I subtract cost of goods sold, how much percent do I have left? And they were the most efficient producer. They could make gypsum cheaper than anybody. And that's who you want to invest in when times get tough. Because the people that can build the product most cost effectively are those that will survive a down market. And the market was down. We were in a depression, a recession, and building was terrible. So their price was down. But something else happened. They got sued. They bought a company that made drywall plaster compound that used asbestos. And people were suing U.S. Gypsum for this potential asbestos claim for mesothelioma, which is a condition in the lungs that can be caused by ingesting asbestos. And the way America's tort law works is it's really easy to sue companies for product malpractice. The company has to prove they didn't do it versus prove they did. So it can be very difficult to defend yourself against those cases. And so their stock was very depressed. In fact, it was down to $15, $16 a share. It had previously been selling at $40. Warren Buffett started buying it. And so I started getting intrigued by that and seeing that, well, maybe there's something to this. Well, unfortunately, they got further and further, more lawsuits, and they decided to declare bankruptcy. Now, you got to be careful about bankruptcy. In their case, they declared bankruptcy. They had a ton of money in the bank, but they declared bankruptcy based on what would happen if they had to pay all these claims. Once you're in bankruptcy court, no one can sue you until you will reemerge. So it closed all the new claims, and they were able to preserve their cash. In the meantime, they worked in the insurance industry to find somebody to insure them against these claims, and they were actually able to do so. One reason why Warren Buffett bought them is because Warren Buffett owns the largest insurance company in the world. It's called a reinsurer. It is a company that insures insurance companies. So he was in a really good position to provide that policy to U.S. Gypsum to protect them from the claims. Once they were able to get that policy, they were able to reemerge from bankruptcy. Guess what? Stock started to take off. Well, a lot of people had shorted the stock thinking they were actually going to go completely out of business. Well, what does that mean? Well, when you short a stock, if you remember from your class, it means that you borrow the stock and sell it, and then agree to buy the stock at a future date to replace it. Why would you do that? Well, if I borrow the stock that's selling for $10 now, and I sell it for $10, I get $10. And then if the stock goes to $2 in the future, because it's crashing, I buy it back for $2 and give them their stock back. See how easy that works? I made $8 and having the stock go down. The problem was opposite though. What if I borrow the stock at $10 and it goes to $40? Well, you have to pay $40 back. You have to buy the stock at $40 and give it back. So you can lose a lot of money if you're not on the right side of that transaction. And that's exactly what happened. When Warren Buffett rescued the company and when the economic conditions improved, the stock went to $30 and then $40. Now prior to that time, though, 9/11 happened. And so I bought a bunch of stock at $14. And then it went to $8. And then actually is when U.S. Gypsum declared bankruptcy and it went to $3. Now when it went to $8, I bought more. My wife thought I was insane. When it went to $3, I didn't buy more, but I should have. My wife's calling me an idiot at this point. But I knew that U.S. Gypsum was the most cost-effective drywall producer in the world. And I knew that they could emerge from this bankruptcy thing somehow, because they weren't bankrupt as a business practice, they were bankrupt legally. And I knew the economy was going to rebound someday, that people would be building houses again. And that's why I bought in, because when you look at the profits that U.S. Gypsum was capable of producing, they were substantive. They were enough to pay for my entire share of stock just on dividend payments alone in 3 years. Most companies, that's 20 years, 30 years. That's the PE ratio, if you remember from your class. So my point is I stuck, I held, I didn't sell. And as I told you, the stock did rebound, and it did go to 30, and it did go to 40 and 60. Well, guess what happens when there's shorts? People who have to buy the stock to sell it back, they need to buy it. Well, when the stock's going up, who owns it and wants to sell it? They didn't. So there were more people that needed to buy the stock to get out of their short position than there were willing to sell. What happens when that happens? Supply and demand. There was more demand than supply. The price continued to shoot up. This stock that I bought half of for $14 and the other half for $8 went to $140 a share. That was pretty good. In fact, the house we live in today was bought for largely by the profit I made on that one stock transaction. My entire house. Free. So my point is that it's times like now, times when we're in a crisis, times when things are artificially deflated, times when people are selling or buying stock emotionally, that the rational industrial engineer can step in and think through, is this a temporary situation? What's the probability that this company is going to survive? What's the profitability of this company? What's its competitive advantage? You put all those things together, you can make decisions. Now, you have to wait for these opportunities to come up. The latest stock crash, I had stock cash sitting for 4 years in cash waiting for a buying opportunity because the market, frankly, was overvalued for a long time. One thing you know about stock markets is they always go up and they always go down. Buy when it's low, sell when it's high. But it takes time, it takes research, it takes effort. There's that 4 hours I talked to you about working for yourself. You have the skills. Maybe you don't have the confidence, maybe you need to get some good mentors, and I'm sure you can find some great mentors. Read some books, watch some YouTube videos, talk to people who are successful, buying and selling stocks, buying and selling real estate, creating their own business. There's tons of them out there. Millions and millions of people in this country are multimillionaires. I guarantee you know some. 20% of the Americans have a net worth of over $1 million. 2% of Americans have a net worth of over $5 million. You know who these people are. You can find these people. Talk to them. Have them help you. They will be happy to do it. If you have the desire and the will and the control over your spending and your lifestyle when you're young, you can retire when you're 45 years old, when you're 50 years old. Think about it. This one real estate transaction alone, if you could have found somebody to lend you the $150,000 for the down payment on these properties and you manage them, in 15 years you'd have $5,500 a month in income. For some of you, that's equivalent to how much you're going to make at your starting job. And keep remembering that $5,500 is inflation adjusted. As inflation goes up, I raise rents, that number goes up. If you could find somebody to help you with your seed capital, by the time most of you are 40 years old, you could spend all the time with your family. And I'm not saying that this is a choice that you want to make. I'm just saying that if you live below your means, if you work for yourself, if you manage your taxes, your interest, your depreciation, and your insurance, if you're active in the stock market and or if you're active in real estate, if you diversify your income streams, you can have a very high quality of life with very low stress and spend all the time you want with family and friends. Hopefully this has been helpful. As always, if you have any questions or want to talk, I'm here for you. Take care.